Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Someone once said that things are getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster. Welcome again to the most widely watched and longest running source of Carolina business, policy, and public affairs. I'm Chris William, and as we close in on year end and the holiday season, will the threat of a fast-paced retail buying season add even more freneticism to the political debate, the workforce worries, the wondering if, in general, if we overstayed our welcome in this unprecedented expanding economy, and so on and so forth? In a moment, then, we will start this week's dialogue. And later on, Liquidia CEO Neal Fowler joins us again. We hope you'll stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Beavon Gravely of the NC Free Enterprise Foundation, Patrick Michaels from Goodwill Industries of Upstate Midlands, and special guest, Neal Fowler, CEO of Liquidia.
Welcome to our program. It's hard to believe this, but happy holidays? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we've passed Halloween. It's official.
Well, welcome to the program, Beavon. Love that name, by the way. Pat, good to have you here. AB, let's start with you. Can I call you that?
You may,
Is
yes.
that okay to call you that? I want to talk about North Carolina, and not politics, but politics. So if North Carolina, do you think North Carolina is going to be a state to watch in 2020?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer, absolutely. There has been a huge influx of attention from the Trump administration and from a national audience. Already we've had a good number of the Democratic nominees for president come to North Carolina, specifically Durham. And then in the 9th district re-election, that we saw a lot of attention and a lot of focus on that special election.
Well, I've got to ask you this, Beavon. If Donald Trump is impeached and not removed, or impeached and removed, how does it change the dynamic in North Carolina?
I think it's a little too early to say, or to really see what that impact is going to be. I think a lot of it is here in North Carolina and in South Carolina. We're kind of tired of the conversation about should he be impeached? Is he going to be impeached? We sort of just want to move on to things that really make life better for people.
Yeah, and one of those core issues, and Pat, you're probably sitting over there thinking, gosh, I hope he does not ask me about politics. In South Carolina, did away with their primary because in some cases, I've heard people say, we didn't even want to have to worry about that this year. What I want to ask you is, one of the big issues are jobs. We saw a recent jobs number that was stronger than many people thought. Goodwill has something to say and something to do about jobs in the upstate, right? Isn't that fair to say?
Absolutely. Our mission, a lot of people know us because they've dropped something off or they've shopped with Goodwill, and those are great reasons to know us, but that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to help people with barriers to employment either get that job, get a better job, or start on their way to a career. And so in the upstate Midlands last year, Goodwill assisted over 13,000 people to reattach or attach to the workforce. And so jobs are kind of what we're all about, and our success we really define in terms of the economic success of the people who seek services through Goodwill.
It seems that there's a bit, and I'm going to use the term schizophrenia about, you hear companies saying we cannot find the talent, we can't find people to hire, but there are still many qualified people that can't seem to find a job. What's the disconnect?
You know, there's the skills it takes to get a job and the skills it takes to keep a job. And what we see is that the people who are not attached to the workforce have either significant barriers. It's very difficult for them because they either have skill deficits or experience deficits that make it very difficult for them to sort of attach in a meaningful way. And so kind of helping them remediate those challenges gives them access to employers who desperately want to hire them. Now, once they're hired, keeping a job can be a different thing. And those skills, abilities, traits, habits that, you know, employers want to see, some people, by virtue of the barriers of kind of their upbringing in their life, they may not have had access to develop those skills in other workplaces or in a successful school environment. And so, you know, helping people get a job can be a challenge. Helping people move ahead and be successful and a solution for that employer can be a different set of challenges.
Wait, Anna Beavon, would you describe the jobs dialogue that we're having in the Carolinas the same way?
I've never heard it characterized that way, but I think that's a great way of putting it. The skills to get a job versus the skills to keep a job. And that's definitely a struggle, yeah.
Is jobs going to be jobs, workforce, employment, you could even say minimum wage. Is this going to end up being a core issue in political elections next year?
I don't see that going away at all. We've had, with the 2017 tax reform on a federal level, and then North Carolina's continual tax reform efforts, people want to have jobs, and ultimately things are going to come down to being a grocery issue. Can people afford to buy groceries? Can families provide for themselves? How does it feel for a family of 4? How does it feel for a family of 5? And that's going to be a huge deciding factor moving forward.
Pat, do you see wage growth at all?
We do. In fact, I was telling our board a year ago that, you know, effectively in the upstate Midlands and South Carolina, kind of that entry level rate was approaching $11 an hour. A year later, exactly, I was telling our board that sort of entry level rate is approaching $12 an hour. And so one of the challenges in finding employees is kind of an economic challenge, is providing wages that sort of attracts that skill. So there's definitely pressure on, and it's sort of a seller's market if you have the skills to get a job.
So to that point, I want to come back to you about a political question around jobs. If the jobs issue is at least maybe not the core, but central to a debate, does that mean that there will be more Carolinians at the end of 5 years that will have jobs? And I know it's a bit of a stretch, but how would you characterize that?
I would like to say yes. I would really like that to be the case. I think that no issue exists in a vacuum. When we're talking about jobs, there are a lot of other things that impact jobs. We've seen a lot of conversation about healthcare and what that looks like. How hard is it for businesses to stay in business or to start? Those are our job creators. So I think it's hard to really give you an answer for that question because nothing exists in a vacuum.
Do you think, and this is specific to North Carolina, AB, do you think the General Assembly around healthcare, how would you handicap that they would consider Medicaid expansion? And maybe not this year.
Yeah.
But in the near term.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to come to a solution for sure. It's gone on. We've held up the budget on that issue alone. And said they've passed many budgets.
I would say small appropriations here and there,
yes.
but they're not tackling the budget.
No.
Is that the new norm?
I hope not. Please say no. Please say no.
And again, I'm not going to ask you about budget or appropriations, Pat, but back to the same point. South Carolina has also not done anything about Medicaid expansion. That's not a for or against question. However, do you see that is part and parcel to some of the woes that you see around these folks that are trying to find jobs? Are they related?
Yeah. Healthcare is a big issue, and it continues to be a big issue. And I think whether you have it and you're finding your premiums are going up, or whether it's a decision maker in how you decide on an employer, having access to healthcare and wellness maybe especially, is certainly a big issue, and it's a growing issue. It's really a showstopper if you don't have health care, or you don't have health care that you think you can afford, or you're making decisions between things that you think are necessities and health care premiums.
Thank you. Stay with us. We're going to meet our guest in a moment. Before we do that, coming up on this program, we like to call them encore presentations because they are the best of the best, we think. And this will be a bit of a repeat, but it is a CBR encore. His name is Marvin Ellison. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Lowe's, the very large retailer. He will join us on this program. Very compelling dialogue. And then also Larry Appel is the Chief Executive Officer of the Fresh Market. He will also be on this program very soon. Our guest and his company look at the world of healthcare through a molecular-based approach to things like remediating healthcare costs for themselves and their client companies. So how does this idea of a subatomic universe in life sciences directly benefit cost control and more broadly the balance sheet? Joining us now is the Chief Executive Officer of Triangle, North Carolina-based Liquidia, Neal Fowler. Neal, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
You're smiling. That's a good thing, right?
Always.
So how do you draw this line, Neal, from the idea that we are going to manipulate molecular particles and peptides and make it cost-effective for yourself but also companies? What does that mean?
Well, so two things without getting too technical on the science front. What is unique to our platform is we can precision engineer particles of various sizes and shapes, some as small as a quarter the size of a virus to a couple of millimeters. And we by doing that, can engineer these particles to traffic and go in certain places of the body. And the good thing about that is it allows us to have drugs loaded into the particle and target the drugs where you want them to be and head off where you don't want them to be, which eliminates a lot of the side effects. The great part about our technology that's happened, it's allowed us, we're beginning to see this now in our human testing, the premise is proving true that we can get greater efficacy with less side effects. But to your question, one of the nice things has been the way we go about scaling and manufacturing these particles has turned out to be very cost effective. It's very capital efficient. While we have not priced yet any of our products for the market, one of our intents is to try to be efficient in the way we enter the healthcare system too. And that would be to try to pass that along to patients and payers in our system.
So is that, and this is such a layman's question because I'm trying to keep up with you on the technology of it. So is that the proprietary part of Liquidia?
That's right. That is, we have a vast array of intellectual property, a lot of which had its origins at UNC in Chapel Hill in terms of how we make and manufacture those particles. And then in the sense of a drug development company, we lay additional intellectual property on top of those particles with the drugs we're using.
Anna Beavon, question?
So as you've grown, what's been your greatest challenge?
Wow, immense. I think
probably loaded, so sorry.
No. Let me back up for a second and just talk about where we came from. I think it's been fun in my seat to watch an idea come out of UNC and Chapel Hill be translated ultimately into something that could be of commercial value and now actually begin to see benefit in patients. So that journey is very, very vast and long. The challenges are always, and I was told this many, many years ago by many mentors when you're running a company, the big challenge is going to be how do you keep it financed? And you go, in this case, from kind of seed capital to venture capital to ultimately we took the company public a little more than a year ago. In all senses of the word, it's a constant battle, and the economy's doing this throughout that journey. So that's a big part of it. And then the other piece I would say is making sure we have the right talent. Talent varies through time in terms of the actual needs we have. In the early days, it's heavy early basic research. As we evolve to where we are today, we now look at a lot more talent we're beginning to bring on with regard to clinical trials, how do you run those, and then ultimately commercial, the ability to actually sell and market the products as we get further downstream.
We talked backstage about, I have 2 adult daughters, and one's an RN in a hospital setting, and the other's a pharmacist. And so
congratulations.
Thank you. They dispense a lot of drugs and administer a lot of medications. And so the innovation that Liquidia is kind of developing and looking at, how might that change the work style or practices of direct service professionals like my daughters.
No, well, great. Well, first again, congratulations. I'm a pharmacist by training, so especially congrats to your daughter.
Thank you.
In really a couple of ways, Pat. I think I'll give you a hands-on example of our lead product. We have a product that's used for a really tough disease called pulmonary arterial hypertension. It's unfortunately a disease without a cure, and at some point in that disease continuum, all patients have to use a nebulizer. And I'm not sure if you've ever seen nebulizers used. They're very cumbersome devices. They have to be assembled by the patient, taken apart by the patient. They have to also be cleaned every day. They require power source. And worst part of all is they have to carry this in the equivalent of a laptop bag. So there's a stigma associated with that. The big push is, despite all of that, and you use it 4 times a day and the patient goes through this, these drugs have to be used. With our technology, we're able to put that, quite honestly, into a very simple palm-sized device.
Oh, wow.
That's very consistent with what you would see used for patients that have COPD. So the convenience factor, and then, as I mentioned to Chris earlier, the efficacy and side effect profile make this a much easier downstream use for the patient now, giving them back a big part of the quality of life as they're battling an otherwise really tough disease.
So Neal, are you guys, and again, sorry for this obvious, maybe layman's question, but are you a biotech company or a device company?
No, we're not a device company, but we do get this question quite a bit. We are not in the sense of a traditional pharma company, a company that discovers new molecular entities today. What we do right now is either take existing products, or maybe we take our partners' new products and put them in our system such that you can tailor the effects of that product in a better way for the patient.
And you have to do this with traditional financing mechanisms like public markets.
Correct.
Back to your point. So you went public summer of 2018, so last
That's
year.
right.
Came out, was it $10 a share IPO?
About 11, that's right, $11 a share.
Trading for about 4. Some people say the enterprise value is about 9 or 10. But what have you learned without giving forward statements? I understand that. So what have you learned about using public markets?
Well, anybody there's a running joke that goes along the lines of anybody who says they really want to go public, you really need to sit down and have a long conversation with them. And the regulations that come along with going public and all the responsibilities are certainly there. And I think from a policy standpoint, we need to continue to try to watch that, because we don't want to put so much burden on companies that they can't go public. But clearly for us, it was the right move. The issue in biotech is always, at some point, if you're progressing your portfolio, you're going to be having to do later stage clinical trials in humans. Those are becoming, by the year, more and more expensive. So venture capital at some point becomes very expensive and hard to get when you need that kind of money. So the public markets need to be there in biotech. So it was a necessary move for us. I think the question is always, for any company in biopharm, when is the right time to do that? You're kind of in this calculus of trying to look at your balance sheet, watch your cash, and then you've got to also time that with where you are as a company, and very importantly, what the markets are doing. Because the IPO market in and of itself is always in a cyclical kind of fashion.
Well, and to that point, is it more important to have public equity outstanding or public debt? And you use both, obviously.
Right.
But what's more important to you right now?
Well, obviously, debt to a point becomes a problem. So people try to wisely use the right mix of both, and you've got examples all through not only the drug industry, but everywhere else where people took on too much of the debt. I think in our case, we've been smart to use a minimal amount of debt, because you always want to have that when you need it, and you may not necessarily ever need to draw that down or have that there, but always in our sense, if we can, now that we're public, being able to get equity at the right price and the right amount for us with what we need is paramount.
Annabelle?
So over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of businesses, and it's really sort of become the norm, go from being socially conscious to being politically active and having a political stance. How have you navigated that space?
Well, it sounds like I'm going to dodge the social and the political aspect when I say this, but I sincerely mean this. What we do is keep it pretty simple. We keep it focused on the patient.
Yeah.
Because our end game at the end of the day is we want to provide for a patient what all of us as patients would want. You want a quality, game-changing, innovative product that's going to do good and you want access to that product. And so if we keep our formula focused on that, the rest of all of that kind of can be churned and talked about all at once. But that's really our business, and the key to our success is staying focused on the patient. So while there's a lot of discussion and all of these things, if we keep it focused on the patient getting a quality medication, but very importantly, which comes up in the payer world, access to that medication, that's really what we need to be focused on.
Okay.
You know, Goodwill, we talk to people who come seeking services about what an employer is going to expect. You know, how can you be successful once you get hired? And I imagine that as an employer, Liquidia may hire people. What would you tell a young person who may watch a show and they're sort of excited about making a difference in the world, and they think something like what Liquidia is doing may be their way to do it? What would you tell them about how to be successful in sort of a fast-moving entrepreneurial firm?
Great question. I have 3 children now, and they talk. You know, they're out of college now, but we have this conversation quite a bit. And the world's pretty round on this, really, in a lot of ways, even though it sounds trite. I mean, there are certainly technical skill sets that we need at various times, but the soft skill sets are really, really, really important in our business. When you think about what we do, we have engineers sitting with biologists who are also sitting in some cases with statisticians. And so teamwork is really paramount. They've got to be able to work in a team setting. It's not an individual game in terms of what we do. Also that entrepreneurial see the world and kind of take charge has to be there, because there's no playbook for what we're doing. Clearly there are certain ways you go about it, but every day is a new day in terms of a new challenge, a new reg that we've got to kind of overcome or whatever. And so the ability to see through that, to have the vision to do that, and then very importantly, ethical. We're in a highly data-driven world, and the ability to be that outstanding citizen that's going to do things the right way. Those are kind of what I call the big 3 in terms of what we're looking for when we bring someone into Liquidia.
And this might go to the ethics question, Neal. This idea that you are early on in the chain of healthcare products, and even as we're talking about bioscience, do you feel like, does Liquidia feel like you have a responsibility to one of the big issues of the day, and that's around opioid misuse and abuse? How do you plug into that? Where do you fit into that custody or that chain of responsibility?
No, great question. So the opioid crisis is obviously very well documented. It turns out our second product is designed to put a dent in that. Today in the U.S., very sadly, there are about 50 million surgical procedures in the U.S., and if you look at chart reviews, about 6% of the patients in those procedures will still be on an opioid 6 months later. That should not be happening. It's a well-intended use to try to stem the pain. So one of the approaches we've done with our technologies, we've taken a very widely used drug that's been around for 40 years, used in surgical suites, called bupivacaine. The drug is injected by surgeons as you're leaving. It's very similar to Novocaine when you go to the dentist. Unfortunately, good old generic bupivacaine works for about 6 to 8 hours. So it helps. If you have a suture in your placed in your arm, it helps right in that area for a few hours, but the patient's still going to need opioids. We have found a way with our technology to make that bupivacaine last for 3 to 5 days.
Wow.
And the intent here, it's a non-opioid drug. Bupivacaine.
Non-narcotic?
That's right, non-narcotic. It's just simply injected as the patient's leaving the surgical suite. And the intent here would be that 6% of 50 million patients that I spoke about a minute ago, we would put a dent, because now maybe you either diminish greatly the need for opioids, maybe altogether. That would be a dream in a lot of ways.
Right.
But certainly maybe the ability to use non-steroidals like a Motrin or an Aleve or something like that, along with the injection they got in the surgical suite, would put a big dent in that problem.
Could that be one of those home runs for Liquidia, where you comes out of left field for you, but a lot of investors go, well, we didn't even know that one was coming?
We think so. It's a very hot area right now. There are a couple of companies already in this space, and everybody's got their own handle on how to approach that. But we feel like a bupivacaine that would work for about 3 to 5 days hits the vast majority of surgical procedures when you look at what you need in terms of pain relief. And so that's what we're after. We still have more clinical testing to go there, but we're very encouraged by what we've seen early on in human testing.
We're almost out of time, and I'm sorry, guys, we're going to have to wrap. Just quickly, Neal, do you feel like at your burn rate, you'll be able to do what you need to do in the next year to 5 years to get where you need to go?
We do. Well, to your earlier question, we'll have to tap the public markets, again, for certain. All biotech companies go through the phase we're in right now, which is your pre-revenue, but you've still got to pay for the clinical trials. So it's a constant game of needing to go back to the markets for that. But you have to pick, again, the right time and the right place to do that. But I'm confident as long as we're executing on the drugs that we're working on, we know that there is inherent interest in that from a shareholder standpoint, that'll be there.
Well, I suspect, and I don't speak for shareholders, but I suspect they'll want you to stay around during that period.
Well,
you stay around
thanks.
during that period.
Thanks. I want to.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Neal, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks very much,
Good luck.
Chris.
Good to see you.
You too.
Pat, welcome from the Upstate.
Yeah,
Please come
thank
back.
you, Chris. Excellent.
AB, nice to have you here. Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
Okay, thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. If you have any comments or suggestions or questions, or you'd like to watch programs, go to carolinabusinessreview.org. Until next week, good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, Sonoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.